Welcome back to the 99, where we're focused on brewing a better competitive commander. I'm your host, Patrick Marlett, and this is the $99 budget Teshar brew. That's right, you heard me, $99 budget competitive. Well, what about all that fast mana, Pat? Isn't Mana Crypt more than half your list, or the entire list? It really depends on when you're watching this. Well, I think we found workarounds for all of those issues, and I have to say, I'm very excited to showcase this deck here today. This is one of my favorite lists. Teshar in general, that is. And at the time of recording, this list was between $83 to $99 on TCG low. Now that does mean you'll be buying the cards either damaged or moderately played, but trust me, all MTG cards play the same, and to get this list up to snuff, we did have to sneak in some very expensive cards. So buying them damaged is the best route to go. Now let me preface this video by stating that competitive and budget is a bit of an oxymoron. I get that, but you still can have competent games of Commander if you put your mind to the test and your budget as well. And this list definitely stands up to the competition. Now the goal for any Teshar player is really simple. You want to make infinite mana to either draw or mill yourself to a solution and or find a loop that will damage or mill your opponents out on the spot. Pretty simple, right? Now, there is one golden rule that I offer to every new Teshar player, and that is make sure your starting hand has at least one sack outlet as well as a retriever, and we'll get into what those are. So, and or one of those two things and at least one white mana source. Everything else will come together as you play through your turns. Trust me, but just bear that golden rule in mind. But before I jump any further into this video, guys, if you enjoy the content here on the 99, the best way to help support it is with a pledge over on Patreon. That's right, you too can be a part of the Brew Baby crew, and there are a ton of benefits that I'll encourage you to check out the link in the description to find out more of, but you get to participate in monthly topics as well as a show dedicated to our Brew Masters every month. And if that's too much for you, if you are planning on buying this list over on TCG Player at that low price of $99, please use the link in the description, as a portion of those proceeds will go to help the channel, and I thank you for that. I don't even know what the percentage of $99 is. It won't be much, but it does go a long way, and I appreciate your help. And or if you're just picking up new cards from Modern Horizons 2, that is an excellent way to help support the channel, so thank you very much. And lastly, concerning the monthly topic for June, you have to incorporate one color in every deck you build. Which is it, and why? And what I really love about this question is how much it says about us as players. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Me personally, I really like building with red these days, and although I'm speaking on a mono white list today, it is the color I incorporate in most all of my list. But hang tight to the end of this video to hear the thoughts of one of our brew crew and or masters on this very topic as well. Now, before I jump into this, I guess we should really understand what Teshar does. 4 CMC, legendary creature, bird cleric, 2/2 body, flying. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. Well, the only ones we're really concerned with here are potentially legendaries, but mostly artifacts. Predominantly concerned with artifacts. This list is over 50% artifacts, and we'll be manipulating a lot of different utilities to loop infinite mana, infinite mill, infinite draw, and all sorts of other shenanigans, such as just destroying your opponents on the spot. But we all through the magic of historic spells. So as we go through this, I'm going to be categorizing these utilities as draw, mill, ramp, cost reduction. Of course, I'll be discussing all of our sack outlets as they are the most important element of this list next to our retrievers, and I'll be discussing one retriever as they all function the same way. And then of course at the very end of this, once you understand all of the working parts, we'll be discussing a handful of combos. And do note, there are hundreds of combos in this deck. So far as different combinations of cards are concerned, there has to be hundreds. So you're working with a lot. I've actually not done, if there's a whiz in the audience, let me know how many combos you find in a Teshar list. But there are a ton, and that's its strength. So, Teshar, let's start with some of the basics. Draw utilities. Now what's important here, and the draw utilities I'm going to be bringing up are self-sacrificing, They're not permanents that stay on the battlefield like Mentor of the Meek or Lost Shield. They're in the list, and they're important because they'll help us pull into solutions, but the ones I'll be discussing now are ones we can utilize to go infinite, right? So here are the patterns you should be looking for. Mishra's Bauble, to start, is 0 CMC and self-sacrificing. That's very important. So for 0 mana artifact, tap it, sacrifice Mishra's Bauble, look at the top card of target player's library, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So that's nothing to write home about. Maybe you get information on a Vampiric Tutor or Imperial Seal. You get to look at it, it's not revealed, so you can share that if you want with your opponents. It's really up to you. What's nice about this though is that you break even with it. It offers you a historic trigger on Teshar, which we know brings back 3 CMC creatures, and of course, it's self-sacrificing. That's the most important thing to note, because there are scenarios where you don't have a sack outlet that works on artifacts, but will, in fact, destroy your creatures. So having an artifact that's 0, that self-sacrifices, is important. So be on the lookout for those as you're playing through your turns, and we'll get into why these are important with our combo section. But the next draw utility I want to discuss is one that does cost mana, but is self-sacrificing. So, Brainstone, and this is a new one. So I'm happy to discuss this card because it's a new one, and I love the art. But for 1 generic artifact, you spend 2, tap it, sacrifice Brainstone, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Now this sounds like a very bad brainstorm, and it is technically, but what's nice about it here is that it comes in artifact form, which means that we can utilize this for a historic trigger on Teshar, which is great. But on top of that, in a world where we have infinite mana, we can also utilize this self-sacrificing artifact to draw through our deck. Obviously, draw 3, put 2 back. At a certain point, you're going to pull into a solution, and you won't need to use this anymore, but technically, you can go pretty deep with this. Nothing in the world of MTG is truly infinite. If there was a loop that was infinite, the game ends in a draw. And if you are going infinite, you do need to stop at some point to just destroy your opponent. So let's get that out of the way. But this is really great because you can go infinite with it to draw your list. And again, not all of our draw utilities are self-sacrificing. Things like Ichor Wellspring, which should be on the screen now as well, is a cost artifact that's non-sacrificing. So we have costless self-sacrificing, costed self-sacrificing, and costed non-sacrificing. So this is the least versatile of all of them, which means we're going to need a sack outlet that can also sacrifice permanents and or artifacts to remove this from our board. Now, not all of our sack outlets cover that, and of course, like I said, we'll be discussing them at near the end of this video. Combos last. But what's nice about this is you can also loop it to draw your deck. So for 2 mana artifact, when Ichor Wellspring enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So that's not so bad. We've got a lot of sack utilities that will put this in our graveyard. We can use this with a grinding station to mill ourselves, and you will want to mill yourself, and we'll talk about why in a second. But when you do that, you also get to draw a card, right? So you sacrifice this, you put the mill trigger on the stack from grinding station, and of course, you'll get to draw a card before you ever mill yourself. Maybe important, maybe you brainstoned beforehand and you want that top card, you know what it is. But Ichor Wellspring is there for you, not only as a draw utility, but as an outlet. So bear all 3 of these in mind. They're all equally playable and all equally useful for getting the job done. Now, moving down the line here, I want to discuss just 2 mill cards. Now, these utilities are permanents. They'll stay, but they're unique in their effect. 1 can mill anyone, 1 will only mill yourself. First one we're going to start with is Codex Shredder. So, for 1 generic Codex Shredder artifact, tap it, target player mills a card. This is so good. It's such a good turn 1 play in games of cEDH where players have, used their top deck tutor, they've expended like whatever top deck resources they wanted to get the, they're lining up their turn, and you play this on your turn, and of course they're going to hit that person who tutored for something of value, right? This is fantastic for those situations, but on the bottom half of this card, you also have a really decent bit of recovery. So for 5, tap it, sacrifice Codex Shredder, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, not a lot of people talk about this, but you can actually utilize the last part of Codex Shredder to loop any spell on your list, provided you have any color mana, white in this case. But you can actually loop a lot of things with Codex Shredder. You don't generally have to, and this is generally used just for the top half of this ability. Now, what's important about the mill in this scenario is that we can mill ourselves. Now, unfortunately, white is still not the color of draw. Despite Esper Sentinel, who's in the list, white is lacking in that regard. So, how do we double down on resources? Well, because Teshar likes creatures in our graveyard, milling ourselves gives us that same potential. It's almost like having a secondary hand, but only for creatures. The good bit of news is all of our creatures are 3 mana value or under. So in a world where we have infinite mana and the ability to sacrifice an artifact, we can recur Codex Shredder with one of our retrievers and mill ourselves to infinity. Now, other than Codex Shredder, we also have the Perpetual Timepiece. And this is a long-standing favorite of mine. It helps you get there. So for 2 mana, artifact, tap it, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Now this one is only you, but that's okay, because you want to put resources in your grave. And maybe you've brainstormed and you know that you have a Myr Retriever in your hand and you want to put it in your grave, because it's much better to put it on the battlefield from casting a Mishra's Bauble and triggering Teshar. Oh my god, the level of complexity is building. But you're starting to see where you'll notice these patterns, and you'll play for these patterns. But the reason we mill ourselves is because we want to put one of our retrievers into our graveyard. But on the back end of this card, we also have the effect, pay 2, exile Perpetual Timepiece, and you can do this while Perpetual Timepiece is tapped. Shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library. Now, this is generally regarded as less useful for the Teshar list because Teshar isn't relying on any one singular line of play. It's not like a food chain deck that is dependent on having that food chain, or an Underworld Breach list that's dependent on having that Underworld Breach. There's no clear one-to-one there. Maybe you can make an argument for Yawgmoth's Will here in Storming, but no one's really relying on that. They'll probably have to use their Praetor's Grasp to steal another one. But there aren't any cards that, in the potential of our graveyard being exiled, we're going to really miss out on. So if you do need to recover anything, then that's fine, but you'll usually sleep on this ability, and that's okay. We have a lot of alternative play lines to make this work. Now, I want to discuss Ramp. And Ramp, in this list, the only mana positive rock, if I'm not mistaken, is Soul Ring, right? But with our cost reducers, we can make a lot of rocks mana positive. But the first one I want to talk about, and I said I was going to save combo pieces till the end of this video, but I lied. This is one combo piece we will discuss early on, because it's a combo on multiple levels. Basalt Monolith. For 3 generic artifact, Basalt Monolith doesn't untap during your untap step. Well, that's a shame. You can tap it to add 3 mana. Okay. You can pay 3 mana, untap Basalt Monolith. Okay, so it could just fuel itself indefinitely. Well, with any cost reducer on the battlefield, you can actually play Basalt Monolith for 1 less or 2 less, or maybe even for free, right? In this scenario, you're not too concerned with the untap effect, right? But you'll want to have a sack outlet that can sacrifice an artifact, sacrifice Basalt Monolith, use a retriever, get Basalt Monolith back. If you have a cost reducer, if you've generated 3 mana off of this and Basalt Monolith only costs 2 to cast, you're going to go up 1 mana every single time. That's where the cost reducer comes in handy. But it also happens to be a combo piece with another card, which we'll talk about later. But all of our artifact ramp can be utilized this way. So Arcane Signet, if it was reduced to 0, can be used in much the same way as I just discussed there. And it's difficult to talk about some of these cards without mentioning their lines of play, but hopefully this helps you see them. Now, next up is Liquimetal Torque, another new card that I really love in this list. So for 2 generic artifact, tap, generate 1 colorless. Or you can tap it to make target non-land permanent become an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. Now, the latter half of this card is really good with our Fragmentize, with our Disenchant. We can make any non-land thing a thing that we can destroy. But it's also really good for making some of our non-land things that aren't artifacts, so we can use maybe a grinding station on them. Grinding station's a real big utility in this list. And that's actually really handy for us in a lot of cases. Say we play Liquimetal Torque and Grinding Station happens to be out, and I'll have it on the screen now. I'll paraphrase what it does, but basically you can tap it to sacrifice an artifact and mill any player 3 cards. And of course, when an artifact enters the battlefield, it will untap the Grinding Station. So when Liquimetal Torque enters the battlefield, it'll untap the Grinding Station. But while that triggers on the stack, you can use Liquimetal Torque to, say, make one of our white creatures, like Mentor of the Meek. Maybe we're done with him for now. Make him an artifact. Tap the Grinding Station. Mill yourself 3 cards. So we're drawing off Mentor of the Meek, now we're putting cards in our graveyard. So much value. We've seen X cards from Mentor, we're seeing 3 more from him going to our graveyard. And then after all that resolves, you get to untap Grinding Station and do whatever else you want with it at that point. But that's really nice because we know Teshar can bring the Mentor or anything else back from our graveyard. But again, Liquimetal Torque with cost reducers also can go mana positive. Again, this is our way of cheating around the fact that we can't manipulate cards like Mana Crypt or Mana Vault in this list because they take up too much of our budget. But that's okay. We can cheat around that quite a bit. And I have to say, building this list and playing this list, it's made me reevaluate some of the importance of cards in my main Teshar list, to the point where I've actually switched out a good 8 cards as of constructing this, because some of the old ways I had of thinking are coming back into play, and I'm realizing that it's actually more streamlined with some of the effects and utilities I have in this budget deck. So that's actually really good news for all of us. But that is Liquimetal Torque. Those are the only 2 ramp pieces I want to discuss, but obviously there's a bunch of rocks in the list. Again, predominantly artifacts, just artifacts. There's also a Milliken in the list. You can look over the list, it should be in the description. That's an artifact creature, but most of them aren't summoning sick and you can do tricks with them. Now the next stuff I want to discuss are those cost reducers. This is our reduction segment and we've got a handful, but I want to talk about 2 of my favorites. One is relatively new and one is old, and it's a favorite of mine. But the first one we're going to discuss is Starnheim Courser. So this is the new one, relatively new. Sets come and go so quickly now. It feels like forever ago that Kaldheim came out, but that was like 2 sets ago, as of recording this. 2 generic 1 white creature Pegasus flying. Artifacts and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. We actually have some enchantments that this benefits, right? So that's cool. But all of our artifacts cost 1 less to cast on top of that. We have a flying 2/2, and it's 3 CMC. Teshar can bring it back. This is a really good card for the deck, and it's dirt cheap coming in at common. I'm really surprised with just the value of this piece overall. I've had a lot of fun playing with this one. But the cost reduction of 1, that's okay. This next one, though, Semblance Anvil for 3 mana. Artifact, Imprint. When Semblance Anvil enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-land card from your hand. Why would you ever want to exile a land card with this? I don't know. But if you exile an artifact, so technically for 3 mana you're using 2 cards here, to bear that in mind. Spells you cast that share a card type with an exiled card cost 2 less to cast. So if they have multiple types, you can reduce, not multiple times, but you can hit multiple things. But so far as this list is concerned, it's an artifact. We're going to exile an artifact. The tricky bit with this is, like I said off the bat, white doesn't have much by way of card draw. So doing this early game can be difficult because your options will be limited, particularly if you had to mulligan down, say, to meet that golden rule. You know, you want the retriever, you want the sack outlet, and you want a white resource. That's, in the perfect world scenario, that's 3 of 7 cards. That's quite a lot to ask for. We do have the redundancy here to make that happen, but Semblance Anvil is asking that you also have another card in addition to it to make this reduction possible. But what's nice about this is that after it goes down, your Arcane Signet, any of your 2 CMC rocks are free. And a lot of our combo cards become free. So that changes the equation as to what is a combo card and what is not. And this is why I say there are hundreds of different combinations and play lines in this list, because depending on how many cost reducers you have out, you can do a lot more with this list than you could with just a deck that had fast mana at the helm. Cost reducers are actually really cool in tandem with Teshar. It's a trick you'll often see with Joyra list as well. She also cares about historics. We've covered Joyra on the channel, but it's not too dissimilar from this. The only difference being Joyra draws cards and Teshar only pulls things back from the grave. But that's okay for our purposes. Now, moving on. 7 sack outlets. Now I'm going to very briefly touch on these to give you an idea of how they all function, and then I want to get to our retrievers and of course discuss combos with you. But I'll have them all on the screen now, and we're going to highlight Altar of Dementia. So for 2 generic artifact, sacrifice a creature, target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Well, this is really good. Most all of our creatures have some sort of power value. You know, Ornithopter, not so much, but all of our retrievers certainly have power. And this will work really nicely in tandem with Teshar as a loop to either mill ourselves into more solutions and or just mill our opponents out, provided they're not on some sort of strategy that's using an Eldrazi Titan that's going to shuffle their graveyard back into their library. If we're concerned about that, we'll look for a more finite strategy. Next up, we have Ashnod's Altar for 3 generic artifact, sacrifice a creature, add 2 mana to your mana pool. Now, this, in tandem with a retriever and some of those artifacts we mentioned earlier, is going to allow us to generate infinite generic mana. That alone isn't a win, but coupled with something like Brainstone can definitely be. Blasting Station, a core card for the list. At 3 generic, tap, sacrifice a creature. Blasting Station deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may untap Blasting Station. What's nice about this is with Teshar out, a retriever, a Memnite, Ornithopter, any sort of 0 CMC body that you can drop and or self-sacrificing artifact is going to allow you to damage out the board. Next up, we have Grinding Station. This has become a staple in many lists outside of blue with Underworld Breach, but has always been a staple with Teshar. For 2 generic artifact, tap, sacrifice an artifact, target player mills 3 cards. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you may untap Grinding Station. This card is fantastic here. It is one of the best mill cards in the list and works so well with Teshar because we can recur any sort of artifact creatures that we are milling with. Next up, we have Piston Sledge, which is an old favorite of mine. Artifact equipment. When Piston Sledge enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +3/+1, and that's nothing to scoff at. That's a 5/3 flying Teshar is much better than a 2/2. Trust me. What's really unique about this card, though, is its equip cost. Sacrifice an artifact. Now, whether or not Teshar is equipped already, you can equip Teshar as many times as you want with Piston Sledge, and in doing so, use it as a sack outlet. Then there's the Thermal Navigator. For 3 generic artifact creatures, sacrifice an artifact. Thermal Navigator gains flying until the end of the turn. 2/2 body. Well, we're not altogether too concerned with that. What's nice about the Navigator is it sacrifices artifacts. It is a 3 CMC creature, so we can recur it from the grave. And it also happens to be historic itself, so we can use it for a trigger on Teshar, which can be really handy when you're trying to fire up a combo. And last, and certainly least, is Claws of Gix. Now, I would say we have 7 sack outlets here, but Claws is more of a sack outlet with a big asterisk next to it. We have 6 solid sack outlets, but Claws requires a lot more work to get the job done. At 0 mana, artifact, pay 1, sacrifice a permanent, you gain 1 life. Now, Claws of Gix is a bit of an oddity and a really difficult card to combo out with in most scenarios. Even with cost reductors, it's going to take more effort on your part to combo with Claws of Gix because you need to pay that 1 additional mana coupled with the sacrifice permanent to gain life, which we're least concerned with. It's the sacrifice we're most concerned with. Now, you still can combo with this card, but it's not anything I'm going to illustrate today. It's going to be very convoluted to do so with this build. However, at 0 CMC, it's still the perfect trigger for our list. Of course, it's also great for setting up combos, provided maybe our blasting station was blasted off the field. We can use Claws of Gix to sacrifice our Mer Retriever and potentially get it back with Teshar to get the blasting station on the field. So, still not bad. Not my favorite, but you can still combo with it in certain scenarios. Now, as a stand-in for all of the retrievers, and I just call them retrievers because of Mer Retriever. 2 CMC, Artifact Creature Mer, 1/1 body. When Mer Retriever dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So, Mer Retriever, very good in this list. We can bring back any 0 CMC artifact, play it, Teshar triggers, brings Mer Retriever back. Oh, I get it now. That's why I want self-sacrificing artifacts, because I can break them, use the blasting station, blast someone, get that artifact back, our Mishra's Bauble from earlier, and continue going through the deck. Or rather, mowing down your opponents. I guess you would draw through the deck on the next upkeep, but that's not necessarily what you're aiming for. Now, Mer Retriever, Junk Diver, Workshop Assistant, Scrap Trawler, they're all there, right? And they all function pretty much the same way, with the exception of Scrap Trawler. But those are our retrievers. This ability, core to the strategy. Trust me, you want it. Now, with all of that said, let's discuss our combos. And I've got 3 to illustrate for you. They're all unique in effect, and I hope they help you see the play lines and of course synergies within the deck. For every combo I'm going to illustrate, it's important to note that Teshar is on the battlefield. Now, with that out of the way, we'll go to activate Chromatic Star, and in doing so, we'll sacrifice Mer Retriever to Ashnod Altar to pay for the 1 generic in its cost. We'll go ahead and tap it, sacrifice Chromatic Star, and add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. In this instance, because we're a mono-white list, let's say we add white to our mana pool. Now, when this occurs, Mer Retriever and Chromatic Star's ability will go on the stack in any order of our choosing. Let's say we draw first, and then we'll use Mer Retriever's ability. Now, because we paid the cost of Chromatic Star using Mer Retriever off of Ashnod's Altar, Mer Retriever can target Chromatic Star in our graveyard. It's important to note, and a lot of players, it's not wrong, but a lot of players don't know this. When you cast a spell, the last thing you do, cast a spell, activate an ability, the last thing you do is pay the cost for that effect. So, in paying with Ashnod's Altar, we're allowed to have Chromatic Star and Mer Retriever hit the graveyard without any triggers occurring until after the mana ability occurs. At which point, Mer Retriever and Chromatic Star are in a graveyard, and Mer Retriever can see the Chromatic Star to target it. So, we're going to go ahead and use its ability to bring back the Chromatic Star. Now, with this effect, you'll note that we've paid 1 generic, we still have 1 left from Ashnod's Altar, we've filtered it for 1 white, and we have 1 mana to spend on this Chromatic Star in our hand, and we're going to use that colorless to bring back the Mer Retriever. Now, Chromatic Star comes back, Mer Retriever's there, we'll do the same thing. I'll announce that I'm going to activate Chromatic Star's ability, paying 1 generic, tapping it, sacrificing Mer Retriever, and it to get the extra mana we need. Now, if we had more artifact creatures, we can pop them all to pay for Chromatic Star's ability. That's less relevant here, but this combo allows you to make infinite generic, blue, green, purple mana, and draw the list with Chromatic Star's ladder ability. So, not too shabby. Of course, this is just one illustration, and one of the more complex ones that's in the list. It's actually part of a really fun combo called the KCI combo. You can manipulate this with Krark Clan Ironworks, which happens to not be in this deck because it's rather expensive. If you want to see that combo illustrated, I encourage you to watch the recent YouTube short on how that goes infinite. But basically, it's pretty broken. And these are called eggs in the world of MTG. They're just low CMC artifacts that happen to replace themselves. So, moving on we have Thermal Navigator, Junk Diver, and Springleaf Drum. To start, we'll use Springleaf Drum to tap Junk Diver and produce 1 black mana. Why not? After which we'll use Thermal Navigator to sacrifice Springleaf Drum to gain flying. While we're at it, we'll sacrifice Junk Diver to gain double flying. Not a thing. When Junk Diver dies, its leave the battlefield trigger will occur, allowing us to recur Springleaf Drum. And we have 1 black mana floating, so why don't we use that to cast Springleaf Drum? Now, I can see you saying at home, Pat, this is infinite nothing. Well, you're wrong. It's infinite ETBs, LTBs, but that's less relevant because paired with any number of cards in our list, this is actually an infinite combo that's useful. So with any cost reducer, we're netting mana of any one color. With cards like Relic Vial in our list, you're just winning on the spot. That's auto death. This in tandem with anything is great. And this is one of those, it looks like a non-bow, but is actually a con-bow that you'll know. You just need to look for the cards. You just need to see the sequences and know that you have a combo. And that's something I can't really teach you. It's something you learn through practice. You'll begin to see how these cards play well together. But don't think that Springleaf Drum is just there for ramp. It also happens to be a combo card for the list. And again, you don't need to be net positive anything for this to work with Relic Vial. And that's quite good in my book. Lastly, the last combo I want to illustrate is with a retriever I didn't even mention. We have Blasting Station, Glinthawk, Tormod's Crypt, and let's say Everflowing Chalice. When we go to cast Glinthawk, we'll go ahead and use its ETB to bounce our Everflowing Chalice back to hand. And damn, we put 10 mana into that Everflowing Chalice. Pat, why would you do that? Well, because I'm trying to win the game right now. When it ETBs, Blasting Station will trigger saying, oh, I want to untap myself, but I'm not currently tapped. Well, let's fix that by tapping Blasting Station, sacrificing the Glinthawk, and damaging one of our foes for 1. Now it'll untap itself, and we have no more Glinthawk. But we do have an Everflowing Chalice in hand, so let's go ahead and cast that, bring back the Glinthawk. Now what's important here is that we have 2 0 CMC artifacts in the field. Because the historic trigger cast on Teshar will bring back our Glinthawk before our Everflowing Chalice ever enters the battlefield, we need the additional 0 CMC artifact to bounce, or if we have a cost reducer, whatever value that might be. Now we can rinse and repeat until we've annihilated the board. And that combo illustrated a retriever that's not even an artifact. So what's important here, and unfortunate for Glinthawk, is that it isn't an artifact. This will only work with sack outlets that sacrifice creatures, right? And some of our sack outlets only sacrifice artifacts. So what's nice about our other retrievers is they happen to be both. They'll work on both. But with Glinthawk, you are limited by that 1 degree. But it's not so bad. It's just an additional way to win out over your opponents. The only trick here is that with these ETBers, and there are other ones that do this, of course Skyfisher comes to mind, I believe that's what it's called, but basically any of these will require you to have at least 2 elements to bounce between them, just due to the nature of Teshar's combo, it being a on-cast historic trigger. So just bear that in mind as you play through combo lines with Glinthawk in this particular list. Now the last combo I want to illustrate is not a combo with any sort of sack outlet. It's not even a combo that requires Teshar. As a matter of fact, you can line this combo up before you play Teshar, and you're in a really good spot. So with Basalt Monolith and Mesmeric Orb, one of my favorite sax pieces, go ahead and tap Basalt Monolith for 3 generic, and then untap it. Oh shoot, oh man, we have to mill ourselves. Mill 1 card. Do that. Do that a couple times. Do that until you have maybe 3 cards left in your list. Or if you really want to go ballsy, go ahead and dump your whole library into your graveyard. Now use Basalt Monolith to put Teshar on the battlefield and cast whatever from your hand that happens to be historic at this point to recur anything from your graveyard. This is an excellent setup piece that exists in the list and happens to work really well with Teshar as a grave recursion commander. So don't sleep on this strategy, don't forget it's there. If you happen to have the Mesmeric Orb out, maybe use the Retriever to bring back that Basalt Monolith because you know you have an excellent combo in hand. But that will do it for this video. That is the budget Teshar list. And if you've followed along with my Teshar brew up until now, you'll notice not too much has changed. We're just removing fast mana, replacing it with cost reducers, and of course, adding different elements of the same thing. And it's actually quite good. I've been generating wins between 3 and 5, so it is slower to some extent, but it's still very good within this price range. And I think if you're on a budget, this is a great way to jump into cEDH. Now, as I like to do with all my videos, I like to thank one random Patreon, and that random Patreon member today is Always Tired. Always has been tired since November of last year. Thank you so much for being a member of the Brew Baby crew. You are among one of the best. But you already know that. And concerning the monthly topic, I'll be reading for Shane, Ireland. Oh, green. Mostly because at heart, I'm a Timmy and love to play big stompy boys, but I think my favorite card in all of Magic is Exploration. I just really like to ramp into a stompy, and in the first couple turns, take the table to Beat Street. And I can wholeheartedly agree with this sentiment. I think at heart, I'm a bit of a Timmy too, and I think that's probably why I built Belby. It's just fun throwing Eldrazi down and going to Beat Street. Sometimes it's fun to swing in cEDH, and you don't get to do it too often, but when you throw down a bunch of stacks, well, Kozilek is king on that table, trust me. But again, this was a fun $99 budget brew. I'd love to hear your suggestion for the next $99 budget brew in the comment section down below. Don't be shy. The one with the most likes and comments, the one that drifts to the top of the comment section, is the one I will do next, and I'm very excited for whatever that might be. This was a fun one to work on, but really difficult. I spent a lot of hours just fine-tuning this and making sure it was within that mark, but I think we got there, and I'm definitely satisfied with it. Again, my name is Patrick Marlatt, and happy brewing, babies!